He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. That was the detail that broke Naomi Brooks in ways she still can't fully explain. Not the woman in their bed, not the coldness in his voice, not even the divorce papers that appeared in her hands like a magic trick she never asked to see. It was the fact that Cassian Draven, the man who had whispered promises against her hair at 2 in the morning, looked at her standing in that doorway, 7 months pregnant, ultrasound photos in her shaking hand, and felt nothing. No flinch, no flicker. He just reached for the folder on the nightstand like he'd been waiting for her to finally show up so he could hand it over and get on with his evening. If that had happened to you, if you had walked through your own front door carrying the first picture of your child, ready to surprise the man you loved, and found that, what would you have done? What would any of us have done? Before we go any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. This story is the kind that will stay with you long after it ends, and trust me, you do not want to miss a single part of what comes next. Drop a like and leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning of the night that changed everything. The ultrasound photo was still warm from being tucked inside Naomi's coat pocket. She had been careful with it the entire drive home, the way you're careful with something you know matters, pressing her palm flat against the outside of her coat at every red light, as if she could feel the paper through the fabric and the wool lining and everything else between her hand and that small black and white image. The technician had printed 3 copies. Naomi had already sent one to her mother in Atlanta. The second was folded inside her purse. The third she was saving for Cassian because she wanted to watch his face when he saw it. She wanted to be looking directly at him the moment his eyes found the outline of their son's profile, the small nose, the fist curled near his cheek, and she wanted to see whatever cracked open in him when he realized it was real. She had been planning it for 2 days. The surprise. The moment. She had even stopped at the Italian bakery on 53rd that Cassian liked, the one run by a man named Enzo, who always slipped extra cannoli into the box without charging for them, because he said pregnant women deserved all the cannoli in the world. She had the box on the passenger seat. She had the photo in her pocket. She had 7 months of love sitting quietly in her chest, and she was driving home through the November dark thinking that some evenings just felt like grace. She parked in the curved driveway of the house she had never fully stopped thinking of as too large for 2 people. Cassian had bought it 3 years ago, before they were even married, and her first thought when she walked through it had been that it was the kind of house that swallowed sound. 22 rooms, ceilings that made you feel small, hallways that went on long enough that you sometimes lost your sense of where you were in relation to the front door. She had learned to love it slowly, the way you learn to love a city that intimidates you at first, by finding the corners that felt like yours. The kitchen was hers. The sunroom at the back where she read on Sunday mornings was hers. The small guest bathroom on the 2nd floor that she had repainted herself 3 weekends in a row until the color was exactly the shade of soft green she'd had in mind was hers. She had made herself at home inside the enormity of it, and somewhere in the doing of that, it had actually started to feel like one. The front door was unlocked. She noticed that only because she had her keys already out, and she felt the door give before she turned them. Cassian was home then. She hadn't expected him until later. He'd texted around 6 to say the meeting with the Marconi family was running long, but she felt a small surge of warmth at the unlocked door, the way you feel when a thing you hoped for quietly comes true. She stepped inside, set the cannoli box on the entry table, pressed one hand to her belly the way she did without thinking now, the automatic gesture of a woman who had gotten used to carrying someone else around with her everywhere she went. She called his name once, softly, a question more than a greeting. The house gave back nothing but its own quiet. She thought maybe he was in his office on the 3rd floor, the one with the heavy door he kept closed when he was on certain calls. She started toward the stairs. The bakery box was on the table. The photo was in her pocket. She was still smiling slightly, still holding the evening's small tenderness in her hands, like something she hadn't yet set down. She was halfway up the stairs when she heard the voice. Not words exactly, more like the shape of a voice, a woman's voice, carrying through the wall of the master bedroom with a familiarity that stopped Naomi's foot on the step. She stood there. Her hand went to the banister. She stood there for what might have been 3 seconds, or might have been much longer, because there are moments where time stops behaving the way you expect it to. Then she finished climbing the stairs. Later, people would ask her what she was thinking, what she felt, whether she already knew what she was going to find before she pushed open that door. She never gave those people a satisfying answer because the honest answer was that she didn't know what she was thinking. She was not thinking. She was just walking toward a door in her own home, in the house she had made her own corner by corner, and her body was moving her forward with a calm that she would spend years trying to understand. The door was not fully closed. She pushed it open. Cashin was there. And so was Vivian Cole. Vivian, who had been Cashin's executive secretary for 2 years. Vivian, who sat in the glass-walled office on the 41st floor of Draven Holdings and managed his schedule with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly how much she was worth to the man who employed her. Vivian, who had shaken Naomi's hand at the company Christmas party 18 months ago and said, very pleasantly, that it was so wonderful to finally meet her. She'd heard so many lovely things. She was in Naomi's bed, in the bedroom that Naomi had chosen the curtains for, in the room where Naomi kept the baby name book on her nightstand, the one with the corners bent down on the pages she kept returning to. The room where, 3 weeks ago, Cassian had pressed his hand to her stomach at 4 in the morning and stayed awake with her until the baby stopped kicking and she could fall back asleep. Naomi stood in the doorway. She did not scream. She was not a screaming kind of woman, and she understood in some distant way, even in that moment, that she would not become one tonight. What she felt was something quieter and more complete than rage. It was the specific devastation of a person who has just watched the architecture of something they built come down. Not dramatically, not in a single explosion, but with a terrible slowness that lets you see every piece as it falls. Cassian saw her. He did not, as she would replay over and over in the months that followed, look ashamed. He looked, and this was the word she always landed on, the word that made something inside her go permanently cold, inconvenienced. Like she had walked into a meeting she hadn't been invited to, like her timing was the problem here. He reached across the nightstand. He picked up a manila folder that had been sitting there, as if it had been placed in advance, as if it had been waiting, and he held it out to her. "There's no good way to do this," he said. His voice was level, not cruel in the way she might have expected, not hot, not cutting, just even. The voice of a man transferring a business asset. "I had my attorney draw up the papers this week." Naomi's hand moved before her mind caught up. She took the folder. She opened it. The words divorce agreement swam up at her from the first page, and she read them without reading them, the way you look at a thing you already understand without needing to process each individual part. "Cashin," she said. Just his name, nothing else. "I'll have someone send for your things," he said. "You can keep the car. The account I set up for you last year is still active. There's enough there to get you settled somewhere comfortable. I've been fair." Vivian had not moved. She was sitting in Naomi's bed with the sheets pulled up, watching the two of them with an expression Naomi couldn't read cleanly. Something composed and watchful, like a person attending a proceeding they had already read the outcome of. "I'm 7 months pregnant," Naomi said. She said it quietly, not as an accusation. She said it the way you state a fact to someone who might have forgotten it, in case that changes something. Cashin's jaw moved slightly. "I know," he said. "The financial provision covers the child as well. Everything's been accounted for." Accounted for. Their son, whom she had just seen on an ultrasound screen 2 hours ago, curled with his fist near his cheek, accounted for. A line item. A provision. A thing that had been handled in advance by an attorney in an office somewhere, folded into a manila folder and left on a nightstand like a receipt for a transaction already completed. Naomi closed the folder. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at him the way you look at something you are memorizing against your will, the way you look at a thing you know you are seeing for the last time as the thing it once was. She said nothing. She turned around and walked out of the room. She walked down the stairs. She picked up her keys from the entry table. She did not pick up the cannoli. She walked out the front door of the house that had her green bathroom and her sunroom and her corners, and she got into the car, and she sat there in the dark of the driveway for what might have been 10 minutes or might have been half an hour. She could not have told you. The ultrasound photo was still in her pocket. She took it out and looked at it. The small profile. The fist near the cheek. She drove away. She did not call her mother until she was 4 miles from the house, and when her mother picked up and said hello, Naomi opened her mouth. And what came out was not words at all. It was something that had been living in her chest since the moment she saw that folder on the nightstand, something shapeless and enormous that her body had been holding very still while she walked out of that house with her dignity. And it came out now in the dark of the car on the empty street as something she couldn't have described if you asked her, part grief and part fury and part a kind of sorrow that felt bone deep and old, older than this night, like it reached down into every time a woman had ever loved a man completely and been handed a folder for it. Her mother said, "Naomi, baby, where are you?" She told her. "Don't you move," her mother said. "I'm calling your cousin Marcus. Don't you go anywhere. You stay right there." She stayed right there. She sat in the car, and she breathed, and she pressed her hand to her belly, and she made herself a promise in the dark. Not a dramatic promise, not the kind of promise you announce, the kind you make quietly to yourself and don't need to say out loud because you already know you'll keep it, the way you know your own heartbeat, without thinking, without choosing, because it's simply part of how you're built. She was not going to disappear. She was not going to fall apart where anyone from Cassian Draven's world could see it and call it proof that she'd never been strong enough for the life he'd brought her into. She was going to give birth to her son. She was going to stand back up, and she was going to do it with nothing he'd given her, on nothing he'd built, so that when she was on the other side of this, and she would get to the other side, she was already certain of that. No one could look at what she'd become and give him any credit for it. Marcus found her 20 minutes later, pulled up behind her in his beat-up Civic with the cracked rear bumper, and when he knocked on her window and she rolled it down and he saw her face, he said, quiet and steady, "All right, let's go." She followed his taillights out of that neighborhood and did not look in the rearview mirror, not even once. What happened in the weeks after Naomi walked out of that house is a story about silence and about the specific kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. Cassian's people expected her to surface somewhere, to reach out to an attorney and begin fighting over assets, over the house, over money, to appear somewhere tearful and public and give them the narrative they were already writing about her in their heads. The wife who couldn't handle the weight of being married to a man like Cassian Draven and had been set aside when she was no longer useful. She did not give them that. She went to her cousin's apartment in a part of the city where no one who ran in Cassian's circles would think to look, and she went quiet. She answered her phone for 3 people, her mother, Marcus, and her closest friend Kezia, who showed up at the apartment on the second day with 2 bags of groceries and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me everything or tell me nothing, I'm here either way." Naomi told her everything. Kezia listened without interrupting, which was the most generous thing she could have done. When Naomi was finished, Kezia sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "That woman knew you were going to come home." Naomi looked at her. "The folder on the nightstand," Kezia said. "That wasn't something a man pulls out in the middle of getting caught. That was staged. She knew you were coming and she timed it." Naomi had not let herself think that yet. She turned it over now, and it settled into place with the heaviness of something true. She had texted Cassian at noon to say she had the ultrasound appointment. She had told him she might stop home after. She had sent the message from the waiting room at the clinic, in the ordinary way of a woman who talks to her husband about her day. Someone had known she was coming, and someone had made sure everything was in place. She did not say this out loud. She put it in the back of her mind with the deliberateness of a woman who understands that some information is more useful when you are not yet ready to use it. There would be a time for understanding what had really happened that night. This was not that time. This was the time for staying upright. She had 42 days until her due date. She had $1,200 in her personal account, kept separate from the household finances because her mother had raised her to always keep something separate. She had a college degree she hadn't used professionally since she married Cassian and moved into that enormous house. She had her cousin's pull-out couch and Kezia bringing groceries and the particular clarity of a woman who has already lost the thing she was most afraid of losing and survived the first minutes and hours and days of it. There is something no one tells you about arriving at the worst thing you were afraid of. They don't tell you that the surviving of it gives you a strange, quiet kind of power. Not happiness, not relief. Just the knowledge that you are still here, still breathing, still moving forward, and that the thing that was supposed to break you has not, in fact, broken you. Naomi made a list. She did it on a yellow legal pad at Marcus's kitchen table at 7 in the morning while the city was waking up outside the window. And the list was not a plan exactly, more a set of true statements she needed to write down so she could look at them. I am healthy. The baby is healthy. I have people who will not leave. I have skills. I have time. She wrote each one out carefully, in her neat handwriting, and then she looked at them for a while, and something in her chest settled. Across the city, in the house with the 22 rooms, Cassian Draven was doing what men like him do after they have made a decision they refuse to examine too closely. He was moving forward. He was doing what he thought passing through something cleanly looked like, which mostly involved not thinking about it. Vivian had moved in within a week. He told himself this was practical. He told himself a lot of things that month. The baby came on a Tuesday. Naomi had not planned for a Tuesday. She had not planned for any particular day because her mother had told her a long time ago that babies don't consult calendars, and she had filed that away with the other true things her mother said that she only fully understood when she needed them. But it was a Tuesday, 3 weeks before her due date, at 4:17 in the morning, and Marcus was the one who drove her to the hospital because her mother's flight from Atlanta didn't land until 6, and Kezia was already in the waiting room by the time they arrived, still wearing the oversized sweatshirt she'd clearly thrown on over her pajamas, her hair wrapped and her eyes fully alert in the way of someone who had been awake and waiting for the call. Naomi did not scream during labor either. She made sounds she could not have described afterward, low and guttural and entirely animal, the sounds of a body doing the most serious work a body can do, but she did not scream. The nurse who stayed with her through most of it told her afterward, quietly and with genuine admiration, that she was one of the strongest women she'd seen come through that ward in 11 years. And Naomi had laughed, which surprised both of them. It was not a happy laugh exactly. It was the laugh of a woman who understood that strength, at this particular moment of her life, had not been a choice. It was simply what was left when everything else had been taken. His name was Elijah. She had gone back and forth on it for weeks, the name book on the nightstand with all those bent corners, and in the end she came back to the one she'd circled the very first time she opened it, 3 months into the pregnancy, before everything. Elijah Marcus Brooks. She gave him Marcus's name as the middle name because Marcus had driven her to the hospital at 4 in the morning and hadn't said a single unnecessary word the whole way there, and sometimes that is exactly the shape that love takes. She held him for the first hour without speaking. Kezia sat in the chair by the window. Marcus was in the hallway. The room was quiet in the specific way hospital rooms are quiet at dawn, a hushed and serious quiet. And Naomi looked at her son's face and felt something rearrange itself inside her permanently. She thought of the ultrasound photo. She thought of the folder on the nightstand. She thought, you don't know what's coming for you, baby, but I do. And I'm going to make sure it's nothing like what came for me. She did not cry until her mother walked in. Then she cried for about 4 minutes, which was all she allowed herself, and then she stopped and wiped her face and asked her mother if she wanted to hold him. Cassian found out about the birth through his attorney. Not because Naomi called him, not because anyone in her circle contacted him. His attorney had quietly maintained a line of communication with a service that monitored public records, and a birth registration filed under Brooks with a father listed as unknown triggered an alert that landed in his inbox on a Wednesday morning. He read it at his desk. He read it twice. Then he set his phone face down and sat there for a while. Vivian was in the outer office. He could hear her moving around, the sound of her heels on the marble floor, the muffled efficiency of her running his world on the other side of his door. She had settled into this life with a speed that he had told himself at the time was evidence of how well suited she was to it. He had not let himself think too carefully about what it meant that she had transitioned from secretary to resident of his home in under a week with the smoothness of someone who had mentally already moved in long before she was invited. He picked his phone back up. He called his attorney. I want to know where she is, he said. There was a pause on the other end. His attorney, a careful man named Whitfield, who had been managing Draven legal affairs for 9 years and had learned to choose his words with surgical precision, said, She's filed nothing against you. No custody petition, no asset claims. She took nothing from the settlement account. Cassian was quiet. She didn't touch it, Whitfield said again, as if he thought Cassian hadn't heard him the first time. Not a dollar. Cassian hung up without responding. He sat at his desk for a long time after that. Outside his window, 41 floors below, the city moved in its ordinary morning patterns, cabs and pedestrians, and the distant sound of a delivery truck reversing somewhere. He had built the kind of life that made him feel, most mornings, that he was above all of it, above the ordinary grinding friction of the world. He had made decisions from this desk that moved money and men and outcomes the way other people moved chess pieces, and he had gotten used to the sensation of control that came with it. He did not feel in control right now. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time and had no clean name for. Not guilt exactly. Something more physical than guilt. A tightness in the center of his chest that he kept trying to breathe past and couldn't quite. He told himself it would pass. He told himself a lot of things that month. The problem with Vivian Cole was not that she was unintelligent. That was in fact the problem. That she was extremely intelligent, and Cassian had been so aware of her intelligence in the professional context that it had somehow never occurred to him to be afraid of it in the personal one. He had spent 2 years trusting her with the operational details of Draven Holdings, the schedules and the access, and the relationships with the kind of men who did not put their names on anything. He had trusted her because she was competent, because she was discreet, because she handled things without being asked twice and didn't ask questions that weren't hers to ask. He had not stopped to consider what a woman like that might do with 2 years of proximity to everything he owned. The first sign came from Ronaldo. Ronaldo Greco was not a man anyone would describe as sensitive, but he had been with Cassian since before Draven Holdings existed in its current form, since the early days in the warehouse districts on the south side, when Cassian was still building the thing from wire and nerve and sheer relentlessness. Ronaldo had a face like a clenched fist, and about as much warmth in ordinary conversation, but he had a quality that Cassian had come to rely on so completely he almost stopped noticing it. He noticed things, small things, the things that didn't fit. He came to Cassian's office on a Thursday afternoon 6 weeks after Vivian moved in, closed the door behind him, and stood in the way he stood when he had something he didn't want to say, but was going to say anyway. "The Ferrante meeting," Ronaldo said. Cassian waited. "Lorenzo knew," Ronaldo said, "before we got there. He knew what we were going to offer, and he knew what our floor was. He walked in there already knowing we'd go to 12, and he held out for 14 because he knew 12 wasn't the number we'd walk away from." Cassian looked at him steadily. "You're telling me we had a leak?" "I'm telling you Lorenzo Ferrante knew our hand before we sat down," Ronaldo said. "Which means someone who knew our hand talked to someone who talked to Lorenzo, or talked to Lorenzo directly." "Who knew the numbers?" Ronaldo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You, me, and whoever prepared the briefing file." The briefing file that Vivian had assembled, formatted, and delivered to Cassian's desk the morning before the Ferrante meeting, as she had assembled and formatted and delivered every briefing file for the past 2 years. Cassian said nothing for a long moment. The tightness in his chest from the week before came back, but it felt different now, sharper, more specific. "Don't do anything," he said finally. "Don't approach her, don't change anything, don't let her know we're looking. I want to know what we know before we move." Ronaldo nodded once and left without another word. Cassian sat alone in his office for a long time after the door closed. He thought about the folder on the nightstand. He thought about how it had already been there, already prepared. His attorney had drawn up those papers earlier in the week. He'd asked for them on a Monday, received them Wednesday. The meeting where Naomi was due home, the one that supposedly ran long, had been scheduled for that Thursday. She had texted at noon to say she might stop by. The folder had been on the nightstand before she texted. He had put it there himself that morning, thinking he would find the right moment, thinking that the longer he waited, the harder it would be. He had told himself he was being decisive, clean. He had not thought about who else knew the papers existed. He had not thought about who else might have known Naomi's schedule well enough to understand that a woman who texted her husband at noon about her afternoon might arrive home in the evening rather than later. Might arrive home at exactly the moment calculated to end things with maximum efficiency and minimum loose ends. "She knew you were going to come home." Kazia's voice. In his head now, from the story Ronaldo had heard from someone who'd heard it from someone else, the way these things travel. He didn't know the exact words Kazia had said, but he could reconstruct them. He was good at reconstructing things. He picked up his phone. He did not call anyone. He set it back down and looked at his hands on the desk and tried to remember the last time he had made a decision entirely alone, without Vivian preparing the information he made it from. He couldn't. Vivian noticed the shift in him before he intended her to. She noticed on a Saturday morning, which was the morning Cassian came down to breakfast after a phone call he had taken in the study with the door locked, which he did not normally lock. She was at the kitchen counter with coffee and her laptop, doing what she always did on Saturday mornings. Working, because Vivian Cole did not fully stop working, ever, which had been one of the things Cassian had admired about her and was now reconsidering in a different light. He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter and did not talk to her, which was not entirely unusual on its own. What was unusual was the way he looked at her when she glanced up. Just for a second, a fraction of a second. And then he looked at his coffee and she looked back at her screen, and nothing happened. Nothing was said. And the kitchen was quiet. But she had seen it. She knew that look. She had seen it on the faces of men who were beginning to add things up. She set her coffee mug down with the precise, deliberate calm of a woman who had been navigating dangerous situations since before Cassian Draven was anyone's idea of powerful. And she thought, carefully and quickly, through everything she had moved and positioned and arranged in the past 6 months. She thought about Lorenzo Ferrante. She thought about the call she had made to a number she'd memorized from a contact she'd built over 18 months of patient, careful cultivation. A man named Dario, who ran logistics for the Castillo operation on the eastern side and who owed her a favor that she had been saving for exactly the right moment. She thought about what was sitting in an offshore account that Cassian had never had reason to look at. She thought, how long do I have? She picked her mug back up and looked at her laptop screen and smiled at something she pretended to be reading. You're quiet, she said. Thinking, Cassian said. About? The Moreno contract, he said. It's not coming together the way I want it to. She made a sympathetic sound and said the right thing about the Moreno contract. And he nodded and left the kitchen, and she watched him go with the particular attention of a woman taking inventory. She gave herself 72 hours. She was wrong about how long she had. Ronaldo had been doing his own quiet accounting for 3 weeks before he came to Cassian, and what he brought to Cassian's office on the Tuesday after that Saturday kitchen moment was not a suspicion. It was a document. A series of documents, call records, account transfers, cross-referenced against dates of operational losses. A communication chain between a number registered to a shell company and a number that Dario Castellano of the Castillo operation used for his secondary phone. Dario Castellano, who had been present at 3 meetings with Lorenzo Ferrante in the past 4 months. Ronaldo laid it on the desk and stood back. Cassian looked at it for a long time without touching it. How far back? He said. First traceable contact is 14 months ago, Ronaldo said. 14 months. Before the pregnancy? Before the ultrasound? Before the folder on the nightstand? Before Cassian had walked into his attorney's office on a Monday and said, I want divorce papers drawn up by end of week. Before a decision he had told himself was his own. She came to you, Cassian said. It was not a question. Ronaldo said nothing for a moment. Then carefully, there was a conversation, maybe 10 months ago. She asked about your relationship with Naomi, whether I thought it was a good match, whether I thought you were happy. He paused. I told her to mind her business. But you didn't tell me. I didn't think... Ronaldo stopped, started again. She was your secretary. She asked a personal question. I shut it down. It didn't feel like intelligence. It felt like a woman asking about her boss's marriage. Cassian looked at him. Ronaldo met the look and didn't blink. There was a very old understanding between them that operated without apology, without theater. It operated with the directness of 2 men who had been in rooms where saying the wrong thing had real physical consequences. I should have told you, Ronaldo said. Yes, Cassian said. You should have. A long silence. What do you want to do? Ronaldo said. Cassian picked up the documents. He looked through them slowly. The call records, the account transfers, a wire that had gone out 2 days after the Ferrante meeting for an amount that bought you silence and loyalty in the specific currency of men like Dario Castellano. He set them back down. Nothing yet, he said. Ronaldo's expression shifted very slightly. Cassian, she doesn't know what we have, Cassian said. If we move now, we get her. We don't get who she's working for above Dario. Dario doesn't give us anyone. He'd rather eat a bullet than talk. He looked up. I want the ceiling, Ronaldo, not the floor. Ronaldo exhaled through his nose. And while we wait, she keeps talking to them. Yes, Cassian said. She does. And we listen to everything she says. He said it flatly, without satisfaction. There was no satisfaction in this room right now, and they both knew it. What there was, sitting between them like something neither of them wanted to name directly, was the shape of how badly Cassian had been played. Not just in business, not just in the operational sense of a security breach and a leak and money in a pocket that shouldn't be there, the full shape of it, the personal architecture of it. A woman who had spent 14 months building access, building trust, building a relationship that ended with a folder on a nightstand, and a pregnant woman walking out of her own house in the November dark. Ronaldo had known Cassian long enough to know when not to say things directly. He had said the important thing. I should have told you. That was what needed to be said, and it had been said. He picked up the documents from the desk. I'll reach out to the contact in the Vega organization, he said. If Dario's been moving information, there's a chance they've seen it come through. Quietly, Cassian said. Always, Ronaldo said, and left. Vivienne made her move on a Friday. She did it the way she did everything, with preparation and with the appearance of naturalness, so that if you hadn't already known to watch, you would have seen nothing. She had a lunch scheduled with a woman named Petra, who ran the charitable foundation arm of the Castillo family's legitimate business holdings. And the lunch was at a restaurant in the kind of neighborhood where no one who worked for Cassian ate. She had made the reservation herself from her personal phone, not the one Ronaldo's people had already cloned. But she had also called Petra from the office line 2 days before to confirm the restaurant name. It was a small thing, the kind of small thing that happens when a careful person makes an error from familiarity. When you've been careful so long that the machinery of caution starts to run automatically and you stop double-checking every gear. Ronaldo's people had been monitoring the office line since Tuesday. He was in Cassian's office by 10:30 Friday morning. She's meeting Petra Castillo at noon, he said. Cassian had been expecting something. He had not expected it this quickly. He sat still for a moment. Petra personally. Petra personally. Petra Castillo was not a logistics person. Petra Castillo was the person you met when the logistics people had finished building something and you were ready to discuss what it was worth and who owned which piece of it. She operated 2 levels above Dario Castellano. She was the ceiling, or close to it. I want someone in that restaurant, Cassian said. Already on the way, Ronaldo said. Cassian stood up from the desk. He moved to the window. 41 floors of cold city air between him and the street below, and all of it meaning nothing right now, all of it just distance. He thought about Naomi. He thought about her in the doorway. The way she'd looked at the folder. Not at him, she had looked at the folder, opened it, read it, and then she had looked at him, but not the way he'd expected. He had braced himself in that moment for anger, for grief, for something that would be hard to stand in the face of, because he had known, even in the practiced coldness he'd put on for the occasion, that what he was doing was not a clean thing. What she'd given him instead was worse than anger. She had given him the look of someone taking a final measurement of a thing, and then she had walked out and taken her quiet with her and left him alone with the woman he had chosen and the folder on the nightstand and the silence of a house that suddenly had 22 rooms too many. He pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass of the window and kept them there. Behind him, he heard Ronaldo move toward the door. Ronaldo, he said. Yeah. The child, Cassian said. What did Whitfield say the name was? A pause. Elijah, Ronaldo said. Elijah Marcus Brooks. The glass was cold under his fingers. Brooks, he said. She didn't use your name, Ronaldo said, and then, because he was Ronaldo and they had been in enough rooms together for him to know when a thing needed to be said plainly, she listed the father as unknown. Cassian stood at the window for a long time after the door closed. Unknown. He was listed as unknown. His son, whose face he had never seen, was growing up in a world where the official record said his father was an unspecified absence. A blank. Not Cassian Draven. Not a name, not a man, not anything. Just a category. Unknown. He had done that. Not Vivienne, not the secretary who had played him with the patience of someone working a long game. He had picked up that folder and held it out to his pregnant wife with a hand that didn't shake, and he had done that. He turned away from the window. At noon, in a restaurant 12 blocks away, Vivian Cole sat across from Petra Castillo and ordered the Bronzino and began discussing the terms of an arrangement that would transfer a significant piece of Draven operational territory to the Castillo family in exchange for protection, money, and a new life in a city that was not this one. Ronaldo's man sat 4 tables away and did not look at them once. He didn't need to. He had a directional microphone in the breast pocket of his jacket, and he caught every word. By 2 in the afternoon, the recording was on Cassian's desk. He listened to it once, all the way through, without moving. Then he listened to it again. The second time, he stopped it at a particular moment, a moment where Vivian said, in the pleasant and businesslike tone she used for everything, that the wife had been the only real complication, and that handling the wife had been the easiest part of the whole operation, because all you needed to do was give a man who was already restless the right opportunity at the right time, and he would make every mistake you needed him to make entirely on his own. Cassian stopped the recording. He sat at the desk. He thought about that sentence for a very long time. A man who was already restless. She had read him that clearly. She had known him that well, had been in proximity to him long enough to identify the precise fault line in his character. The specific flavor of impatience and pride and wanting more that lived in him beneath the competence and the control. And she had applied pressure to it with the accuracy of someone who had been studying the load-bearing points of a structure she intended to eventually. Cassian sat with that sentence for 47 minutes. He knew the exact duration because the clock on his desk was the first thing he looked at when he finally moved, and the recording had ended at 2:14, and it was now 3:01. And in those 47 minutes, he had not gotten up, had not refilled his coffee, had not taken a single call from the 3 people who had tried to reach him on the phone, sitting face up on the corner of his desk. He had sat in his chair with his hands flat on the armrests, and he had thought, not planned, not strategized, thought, in the raw and unproductive way that happens when information arrives that is too large and too personal to be immediately converted into action. The way you think when someone shows you a photograph of something you did, and the photograph is accurate, and you cannot argue with it, and all that's left is the sitting with what it shows you about yourself. A man who was already restless. He was not angry at Vivian for saying it. That was the thing that unsettled him most in those 47 minutes, that he could not make himself primarily angry at her for that particular sentence, because it was true. She had not invented a weakness and exploited it. She had found a real one. She had looked at him with the patient attention of a trained observer, and she had seen something that was genuinely there, and she had used it, and everything that followed, the folder, the doorway, Naomi's face, the word unknown on a birth record in a hospital across the city, had flowed from that real thing in him as directly as water finding the lowest ground. He could be furious at her for the betrayal, for the Ferrante leak, for the Castillo arrangement, for the money in the offshore account, for the murders. Ronaldo's document had linked, 3 degrees of separation but linked nonetheless, to operations she had fed information to while sitting 40 feet from his office door. He could be furious at all of that, and he was. That fury was clean and manageable and had a shape he recognized. But the other thing, the thing about what she had seen in him, that did not have a clean shape, and he could not make it into something manageable. And so he sat with it for 47 minutes until the clock said 3:01, and he finally stood up. He called Ronaldo. "Get her out of my house," he said. Ronaldo was quiet for exactly 1 second. "How?" "I don't care how," Cassian said. "I want her out of there before tonight. Find a reason. Tell her there's a function she needs to attend on my behalf. Tell her the cleaning service is coming and I need the house clear. I don't care what you tell her. I want her out, and I want the house swept for devices before she comes back." "And when she comes back?" "She won't," Cassian said, "but she can't know that yet." He hung up and stood at the window again. The city below. The afternoon light going gray at the edges the way it did in November, the sky pressing down flat and colorless. He thought about Petra Castillo, who was probably already back in her own office, already making calls, already moving pieces that Cassian had not yet identified and could not yet see. He thought about how long he had been operating with compromised intelligence. 14 months. Every briefing file, every strategic meeting that Vivian had prepared materials for, had scheduled, had sat adjacent to with her precise and comprehensive knowledge of exactly what was discussed and what was decided, and what the numbers were. 14 months of a woman who was fluent in the entire operational language of his organization, feeding the vocabulary of his decisions to people who were paid to use it against him. He thought about which of his losses in the past year were actually losses, and which ones had been harvested. The sweep of the house took 4 hours. Ronaldo's technical people found 6 devices, 2 in the study, 1 in the base of a lamp, 1 behind a wall socket that had been partially disassembled and reassembled with enough skill that only someone who knew to look for it would have found it. 1 in the kitchen, fitted into the underside of the kitchen island in a spot that would have required lying flat on the floor to place it. 1 in the master bedroom, which Cassian stood and looked at for a long moment when the tech showed him where it had been. 1 in his personal car, fitted beneath the dashboard on the passenger side, and 1 in the office at Draven Holdings, in the conference room where he held the meetings that did not appear on any official calendar. 6 devices. 14 months. The tech laid them out on the desk in Cassian's home office in a row, the way you lay out evidence, because that's what they were, and Cassian looked at them without touching them. "How long on the conference room one?" he said. The tech, a compact, careful man named Yusuf, who Ronaldo had brought in from outside the organization specifically because he had no prior relationship with anyone in it, said, "The construction on that one is consistent with the others. Same materials, same assembly method. I'd estimate they all went in within the same window, 2 to 3 months apart." "So staggered," Cassian said. "Staggered," Yusuf confirmed. "Not all at once. Someone who understood that multiple simultaneous installations increased detection risk. These were placed incrementally, opportunistically, when access presented itself. When Cassian was out of the room. When she was in the house alone. When she had a reason to be in the conference room without him, adjusting the setup for a meeting, checking the audiovisual connections, doing any of the dozen small administrative tasks that had been hers to manage without oversight, because he had trusted her to manage them. "Pull the conference room device apart," Cassian said. "I want to know everything that's been transmitted." Yusuf nodded and began carefully picking up the devices. Ronaldo was in the doorway. He had been in the doorway for a while, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, watching Cassian look at the row of devices on the desk, with an expression that Ronaldo had not seen on Cassian's face in many years. Not anger, not calculation. Something more stripped down than either of those things. Something that Ronaldo, who was not a sentimental man, recognized as the specific look of a person who has understood something about themselves that they cannot unknow. "You need to eat something," Ronaldo said. Cassian looked at him. "I'm serious," Ronaldo said. "You've been in this house for 6 hours, and I don't think you've had anything since this morning. You need to eat something, and you need to sleep, because tomorrow we are going to have a very long and very ugly conversation about how we close this, and you need to not be running on empty when we have it." Cassian said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "She's been in this bedroom, Ronaldo." Ronaldo was quiet. "She had access to this bedroom," Cassian said. "She put a device in this room, and she slept in this room, and she—" He stopped. He pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose and stood there for a moment. "Naomi never did anything to her. Naomi never—" He stopped again. "I know," Ronaldo said. "She used me," Cassian said. "That's the part I can absorb. She used me. She ran an operation against me. I didn't see it coming. Fine. I've been played before. I'll live with it." He dropped his hand from his face. "But she used me against Naomi. That's different." Ronaldo came off the doorframe and walked into the room. He pulled a chair out from the desk and set it in front of Cassian and sat down in it, which was not something Ronaldo typically did. He was a standing in doorways type of man, a hovering at the perimeter type, not a sitting down close type. The fact that he sat down now meant something, and they both knew it. "You already knew that," Ronaldo said. "You knew it when you heard the recording this afternoon. You've been sitting with it for hours, so stop processing it like it's new information and tell me what you actually want to do." Cassian looked at him. "Not about Vivienne," Ronaldo said. "I know what you want to do about Vivienne. What do you want to do about the other thing?" A silence stretched between them that had the particular weight of a conversation that had been coming for a long time. "I need to find her," Cassian said. Ronaldo did not say "I told you so," because that was not how the two of them operated. He did not say anything that acknowledged that this had been, in some version, predictable. He just said, okay. And then he said, Whitfield doesn't have a location? He has a borough, Cassian said. He doesn't have an address. She hasn't filed anything. She's not using any of the accounts he can access. She's not coming up anywhere with her name attached. Marcus, Ronaldo said. The cousin. She's with the cousin, or she was. I don't want to push on the cousin, Cassian said. I come at her through someone in her family. She'll know I found her by running her people, and she'll... He stopped, reconsidered. She'll think I'm the same person I was, coming at her the way I come at everything. Ronaldo said nothing for a moment, which was itself a response. She's not going to want to hear from me, Cassian said. I know that. I'm not... He paused. I'm not building a scenario where she hears from me and decides I was right all along. I just need her to know what actually happened, what was actually done to her. She deserves to know that. And your son, Ronaldo said. Cassian was quiet. Say it, Ronaldo said. Say the whole thing. And my son, Cassian said. Yes. Vivienne came back to the house at 9:45 that evening. Cassian had given specific instructions about how this would go. No drama, no confrontation in doorways. He wanted her inside, settled, comfortable, unaware. He wanted her to have the full experience of a normal evening before everything changed, because he needed her to not have time to remove herself from the blast radius of what was coming. She came through the front door and called his name, and he answered from the sitting room, where he was on the couch, with a drink he had been slowly nursing for the past 2 hours without actually wanting it. She came in and kissed him on the cheek and asked how his afternoon had been. Quiet, he said. She sat across from him and crossed her legs and began talking about the lunch with Petra, which she described as a charitable foundation's networking event that had gone well but run long. She was fluent and untroubled, and if Cassian had not spent the afternoon in the company of a recording of her actual conversation with Petra Castillo, he would have believed her completely. He watched her talk. He watched her hands, which were still and composed. He watched her face, which was arranged in the easy warmth she wore with him in private spaces, the version of her that was softer than the office version, more personal, or what he had believed was more personal. He watched her, and he understood now that he had never seen a version of Vivienne Cole that was actually hers. Every version had been constructed for a specific operational purpose, and the warmth and the softness and the intimacy of the past several months had been the most carefully constructed version of all, because it was the one designed to be closest to him while he was least guarded. You're tired, she said, reading something in his face. Long day, he said. She made a sympathetic sound and offered to get him more ice for his drink, and he said, no thank you. And she settled back into the chair, and he looked at her and thought about 6 devices in a row on the surface of his desk. He thought about the device in this room, which was no longer active because Yusuf had removed it along with the others, which meant that whatever happened in this room tonight would not be transmitted anywhere, which meant that Petra Castillo and Dario Castellano and whoever sat above Petra in the structure Vivienne had been building around him would not hear it, which meant he had, for the first time in 14 months, a room she couldn't listen to. I talked to Whitfield today, he said. She looked at him. About? About an offshore account, he said. One of our subsidiary accounts. There's been irregular activity. Her expression did not change in any dramatic way. It was a small thing, a fractional adjustment in the muscles around her eyes, a slight recalibration of stillness, the kind of micro-movement that a person who has not been trained to watch for it would not see. Cassian saw it. How irregular? She asked. Enough, he said. He's looking into it. She made a thoughtful sound. Do you want me to cross-reference the transfer logs? I have access to the secondary. No, he said. A beat. I think I've got it covered, he said, and he smiled at her, and she smiled back, and the room was warm and quiet, and both of them were lying. The arrest happened at 6:15 the following morning. It was not Cassian's operation, which was the most important thing about it. It was federal, because Ronaldo had spent the previous 12 years doing something that no one in Cassian's immediate world knew about. Building a quiet relationship with a federal organized crime task force that operated on the understanding that certain information delivered at the right moment from the right source could be worth more than any conviction they could otherwise build. Ronaldo had never traded Cassian. He had never traded anyone in the organization, What he had traded over the years was peripheral, third parties, competing operations, the kind of intelligence that demonstrated value without costing anything that mattered. Last night, for the first time, he had called in something larger. He had delivered the recording, the transfer documents, and the device analysis to a contact he had kept carefully insulated from everything for 9 years. And he had said, plainly, that there was a woman who had been running an intelligence operation against a private organization for 14 months, facilitating the flow of operational information to a competing criminal family, connected to a chain of transactions that linked directly to 3 unsolved homicides, and that she would be at a specific address until approximately 8 in the morning. The federal agents were at the door at 6:15. Cassian was not there when they came. He had left at 5:30, on Ronaldo's very strong advice, because there are lines even careful men don't cross without consequence, and being present for the arrest of a woman in the house where you both slept was on the wrong side of several of them. He drove to Ronaldo's apartment on the west side and sat in Ronaldo's kitchen while Ronaldo made coffee with the focused attention of a man who believes firmly in the ritual management of difficult mornings. His phone buzzed at 6:22, a text from the federal contact. One word, done. He set the phone on Ronaldo's kitchen table. Ronaldo poured 2 cups and set one in front of him and sat down across from him. "It's going to get loud," Ronaldo said. "The Castillo family is going to know within hours that she was picked up. They're going to know we were involved. That conversation is coming, and it's not going to be, 'I know,'" Cassian said. "The Ferrante situation also has to be addressed directly. Lorenzo is going to I know," Cassian said. Ronaldo stopped. Cassian wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. Outside Ronaldo's kitchen window, the city was turning pale gray with early light, the specific color of a November morning that has not yet decided what kind of day it's going to be. "I need to find Naomi," Cassian said. Ronaldo looked at him carefully. "Cassian, the situation with the Castillos alone is going to require your full—" "I know what it requires," Cassian said. "I'm telling you what I need. Those are 2 different things." He looked at the mug. "I've been operating at what something requires for 15 years. I have not been—" He stopped, started over. "My son is 4 months old. I have never seen his face. My wife, my former wife, walked out of her own house in the middle of the night 7 months pregnant because I handed her a folder that a woman I was sleeping with made sure was on the nightstand when she arrived." He looked up at Ronaldo. "I need to find her. Everything else is also true, and I'll handle everything else. But I need you to understand that this is not a secondary item." Ronaldo held the look. He had a complicated expression, one that had several layers operating simultaneously. The practical concern of a man who understood exactly how hostile the next several weeks were going to be. The older and simpler concern of someone who had watched Cassian build something and was now watching him take stock of what it had cost. "I'll put someone on it today," Ronaldo said. "Carefully." "Carefully," Cassian confirmed. "She cannot think she's being tracked. She cannot think—" "I know," Ronaldo said. "Quietly. We find out where she is. You decide from there." Cassian nodded. He picked up the coffee and drank some of it and set it back down. His phone buzzed again. He looked at it. The number was one he recognized from the Castillo operation. Not Petra's personal line, a secondary line, one of the communications numbers. He stared at it for 3 seconds. He let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again immediately. He picked it up. "Draven," said the voice on the other end. Not Petra. A man's voice, older, carrying the specific authority of someone who does not make their own calls, and is therefore making this one as a deliberate signal of how serious the situation is. "I think we should speak." Cassian recognized the voice. It belonged to a man named Victor Castillo, who was 73 years old and had not personally involved himself in a direct communication with any external party in over a decade. Victor Castillo, who was Petra's uncle and the actual ceiling of the structure that Vivian had been building toward. "I'm listening," Cassian said. "Not on the phone," Victor said. "Tonight, the Hargrove building, top floor, 8 o'clock. "That's your building," Cassian said. "Yes," Victor said. "It is." A pause. "I'll be there," Cassian said. He hung up and looked at Ronaldo, who had heard enough of it to understand the shape of what had just happened. "Victor Castillo just called you directly," Ronaldo said. It was not a question. Yes, Cassian said. Ronaldo was quiet for a moment. Then, he's either going to offer you something, or he's going to try to bury you. Or both, Cassian said. Or both, Ronaldo agreed. Cassian set the phone down on the table between them and looked at it for a moment. There was something he needed to do before 8 o'clock tonight that had nothing to do with Victor Castillo or the Castillo operation or the 14 months of compromised intelligence or any of the operational machinery that was currently in various states of emergency. There was one thing that mattered more than all of it, and it had been mattering more than all of it since the moment he had sat at his desk and heard Vivian Cole's voice on a recording saying that handling the wife had been the easiest part. He had found out that morning, through Ronaldo's careful inquiry, that Naomi was working at a small nonprofit organization in a neighborhood on the east side of the city, that she had been there for 3 months, that she had a reputation in that office for being the person who stayed latest and arrived earliest and knew everyone's name. He had an address. He was not going to show up at her workplace. Understood, with a clarity that felt like the first genuinely clear thing he had understood in months, that showing up at her workplace would be exactly the kind of move that told her nothing had changed, that he was still operating from the assumption that what he wanted and when he wanted it should determine the terms. He needed to do this differently. The problem was he had never done anything differently. Different was not a mode he had ever needed to develop, because different required a kind of humility that had never been professionally useful, and he had therefore never had occasion to practice it. He was going to have to figure it out from scratch. He pulled out a piece of paper from the small pad Ronaldo kept by the phone, an actual notepad, paper, because Ronaldo did not trust anything digital for things that mattered, and he uncapped the pen that was sitting next to it, and he sat there for a long moment with the pen in his hand and the paper blank in front of him. He had no idea how to start. He had delivered ultimatums in writing. He had communicated directives, conditions, terms, and decisions. He had sent messages that ended relationships, relocated assets, and ended careers. He had never in his adult life written something with no leverage in it, nothing being demanded or offered or transferred, just the raw material of what he had done and what it had cost someone who did not deserve to pay it. He wrote, Naomi. He looked at it. He wrote, there are things that happened that you deserve to know. I'm not asking for anything. I understand you don't owe me a response, but there is information that belongs to you, and I need to make sure you have it. He stopped. He read it back. It sounded like a legal communication. It sounded like Whitfield had written it. He crossed out everything after the first word and sat there again. He wrote, I was wrong. He stared at that for a while. Then he wrote, I was wrong about more than you know. What happened the night you came home was not what it appeared to be. That is not an excuse, and I am not offering it as one. What I did was still what I did, and I cannot undo it. But there is a woman who arranged that evening knowing you were coming home, and she has been arrested this morning by federal agents, and there are things that are going to become public that you need to be prepared for. You and Elijah need to be prepared for what's coming. He stopped again. The name of his son on the paper in his own handwriting was a different kind of weight than saying it out loud. He looked at it for a moment. He wrote, I will not contact you again after this unless you reach out first. I mean that. But I needed you to have this information before tonight, because tonight is when everything changes. And if the last thing I do that is actually worth something is make sure you're not blindsided by it, then at least there is that. He signed it with his first name only. He folded it. He had Ronaldo's man deliver it to the nonprofit's front desk before noon, with instructions that it was personal correspondence for Naomi Brooks and was not to be opened by anyone else. He did not know if she would read it. He did not know if she would believe it. He knew only that at 8 o'clock tonight he was going to walk into a room with Victor Castillo, and he had no guarantee of what he was walking out with. And there was a version of tonight where things went in a direction that left him without the opportunity to say this to her in any form at all. He had said it. That was what was in his control. At 7:45, he put on his coat and looked at Ronaldo. You're not coming in, Cassian said. It was not a question. I'll be in the lobby, Ronaldo said. If you're not down in 90 minutes, I'm coming up. Don't come up, Cassian said. Then be down in 90 minutes, Ronaldo said. The Hargrove building was 17 minutes from Ronaldo's apartment. They drove in silence, the way they always drove when something serious was ahead, because they had been doing this long enough to understand that there was nothing useful to say in the car on the way to a meeting that might go several different directions, and that silence was not the absence of communication between them, but a form of it. Cassian got out at the curb. He looked up at the building. 43 floors of glass and steel, every window above the 30th floor lit from inside in the way of a building that is inhabited at its top by someone who never fully closes down operations for the night. He went through the lobby. The elevator came quickly, which meant it had been waiting for him. He pressed the button for the top floor and felt the elevator lift him and stood with his hands at his sides, not in his pockets, because you do not put your hands in your pockets when you walk into a room with Victor Castillo for the first time. The elevator doors opened. The room was large and simply furnished in the way of a man who has nothing to prove by his furniture. Victor Castillo was seated at a table near the window, and he was exactly as Cassian had always imagined him from description. Compact, white-haired, with the kind of stillness that is not relaxation but the absolute opposite of it, a coiled and permanent readiness that age had refined rather than diminished. There were two other men in the room. Cassian clocked them in his peripheral vision and identified neither as Ronaldo's people, which was expected but still noted. Victor gestured to the chair across from him. Cassian sat. Victor looked at him for a moment without speaking. The look of a man who has done this many times and has learned that the first person to speak in a silence like this one has already told you something important about them. Cassian met the look and said nothing. Victor made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. "She told me you were a difficult man," he said. She was very skilled at underestimating people in ways she dressed up as assessment. "What do you want?" Cassian said. "The same thing I always want," Victor said. "To have less problems than I had yesterday." He folded his hands on the table. "Your woman, forgive me, your former employee, was a useful instrument. Instruments break. The instrument is equally breakable, or whether he's the kind of man I should be doing business with instead of against." Cassian looked at him steadily. "You've been working against me for 14 months. Vivian worked against you," Victor said. "I used what she offered. That is different." "In what way?" "In the way that I had no personal investment in your destruction," Victor said. "She did. I don't typically have personal investments. They make the arithmetic messy." He paused. "She wanted your operation, she wanted your assets and your territory, and she wanted to be standing over the remains of what you'd built. I wanted certain logistical corridors that your operation controls and access to two specific municipal relationships that are easier to navigate through your organization than mine." He let that land. "I could have gotten those things by continuing what Vivian was building. I could also, conceivably, get them through a direct arrangement with you. The first option has become complicated, given this morning's events. The second option requires that you be alive and operational and not so furious that you can't think clearly." "I'm thinking clearly," Cassian said. "I know," Victor said. "That's why I called you instead of the other thing." The other thing. Not said. Present in the room nonetheless as the shape of what the alternative was. Cassian looked at this man who was 73 years old and had more blood on his ledger than Cassian would accumulate in 3 lifetimes. And he thought about what he was being offered and what it would cost, and whether the version of himself that accepted this offer was a version he could continue to be. He thought about a piece of paper folded on a desk in a nonprofit office on the east side. He thought about a boy named Elijah Marcus Brooks, whose father was listed as Cassian, looked at Victor Castillo, and made his decision in the space of 4 seconds. Not because 4 seconds was enough time to fully think through what he was deciding. It wasn't. It was enough time to understand that he was standing at the exact intersection of everything he had built and everything he had destroyed, and that the path through this room led in one direction only, not forward in the way he had always moved forward, which was by acquiring and consolidating and pressing harder, but through something that felt like the opposite of all of that, something that required him to put down the instrument he had been picking up and swinging for 15 years. "No," he said. Victor looked at him. "I'm not making an arrangement with you," Cassian said. "Not the corridors, not the municipal relationships, not any version of what you're describing." He kept his voice level, because raising it in this room would be a mistake, and he knew it. "You've been running an operation against my organization for over a year. Your instrument, as you call her, is in federal custody right now because I put her there. If I sit across from you and negotiate terms, I'm telling every family in this city that the way to do business with Cassian Draven is to spend 14 months compromising his operation and then call him when it goes sideways, and I cannot afford that lesson to be the one they take." Victor was quiet. His hands were still folded on the table. His expression had not changed by any visible measure, but something in the room had shifted, the way air shifts before weather. "That is," Victor said slowly, "a very principled position for a man in your current situation." "I'm aware of my current situation," Cassian said. "Are you?" Victor unfolded his hands. He placed them flat on the table, which was itself a kind of statement. "Vivian Cole, in the time she was feeding us information, gave us enough material to make 3 federal referrals that would take years to investigate, but would consume your organization's legal resources entirely. She gave us contact information for 7 of your peripheral associates who have no particular loyalty to you and significant motivation to cooperate with anyone who approaches them with the right offer. She gave us the location and operational details of 2 facilities that are currently running activities that would be very expensive for you if they became public." He paused. "I am telling you this not as a threat. I am telling you because you are clearly a man who makes better decisions when he has complete information, and you should have complete information about the room you are in." Cassian held the look. His heart was doing something specific in his chest. Not fast exactly, more like heavy, each beat landing with more pressure than usual, the physical sensation of a body that has understood before the mind has fully caught up that the stakes in this room are absolute. "Then we have a problem," Cassian said. "We do," Victor agreed. "And you called me here because you want to resolve it without using what you have." "I called you here," Victor said, "because I am 73 years old and I have spent 50 of those years cleaning up the consequences of decisions made by younger men who thought that destruction was easier than negotiation. It is never easier. It is always more expensive, and you are not a stupid man, which makes you worth talking to." He leaned back slightly. "But you are also, apparently, a man who has recently done something that has rearranged his priorities, which makes you unpredictable, and I do not work well with unpredictable." Cassian said nothing. "The woman," Victor said, not unkindly, just directly. "The wife." The word landed in Cassian's chest like something physical. "She is not your leverage," Cassian said. His voice had changed slightly, a degree of flatness entering it that was not coldness, but something underneath coldness, something more foundational. "If you're about to tell me that she is part of this conversation in any way, I need you to stop." "She's not leverage," Victor said. "She's a data point. She tells me who you are right now, which is relevant to what I do with you." He studied Cassian for a moment. "You came in here without a weapon, which my men confirmed. You left your associate in the lobby. You sat down across from me, knowing what I had, and knowing what I could do with it, and you said no to the only offer I've made." He paused. "Why?" Cassian thought about the piece of paper. He thought about a boy named Elijah, whose father was listed as unknown. "Because I'm done," he said. Victor looked at him. "Done with?" "This," Cassian said. He said it simply, without performance, without the kind of weight that would have made it theatrical. Just the word, plain and specific. "I've been running this organization for 15 years. I have made decisions that I understood at the time and that I no longer understand the way I did when I made them. I have—" He stopped, breathed. "I have a son I have never seen. I have an ex-wife who rebuilt her life from nothing after I handed her divorce papers while she was 7 months pregnant. I have spent the last several weeks discovering that everything I thought I controlled was being listened to and redirected by a woman who played me so completely that I cannot identify a single decision in the past 14 months that was entirely my own." He looked at Victor. "I'm done. Not tonight. I understand tonight is not the mechanism for that, but I'm telling you, as complete information, that the man you are trying to make an arrangement with is in the process of becoming someone who is not going to be running this kind of operation much longer." The room was very quiet. One of Victor's men shifted slightly near the wall. Victor did not look at him. "That," Victor said after a long moment, "is either the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this building, or it is the most sophisticated play I have encountered in 20 years. He studied Cassian. "I have not yet determined which." "It's not a play," Cassian said. "No," Victor said slowly. "I don't think it is." He was quiet for another moment, which makes it considerably more complicated for both of us. I was in the lobby at 9:48. Ronaldo was there, standing near the elevator bank with his coat still on and his phone in his hand and the specific expression of someone who has been making calculations about worst-case scenarios for the past 90 minutes. He looked at Cassian coming off the elevator and read something in his face. "You're alive," Ronaldo said. "I'm alive," Cassian confirmed. And? "And we have about 72 hours before Victor Castillo decides what to do with what Vivian gave him," Cassian said. He moved through the lobby toward the exit, and Ronaldo fell into step beside him, and they went through the glass doors into the cold November air and walked to the car. "He's not going to use the federal referral material. He told me he would and he won't. It's not his style. He doesn't deal with federal mechanisms if he can avoid it. Too many variables he can't control. But the peripheral associates are real. Dario's contacts are real. He has enough to make the next 6 months extremely painful." "So what did you give him?" Ronaldo said. They reached the car. Cassian stopped with his hand on the door and looked at Ronaldo over the roof of it. "I told him I was going to dismantle the organization," Cassian said. Ronaldo stared at him. "Not immediately," Cassian said. "Responsibly. In a way that doesn't leave anyone exposed who doesn't deserve to be exposed. But I told him that the operation he wanted access to is not going to exist in its current form within 18 months. And that made the arrangement he was offering irrelevant, and that made his leverage against me considerably less useful to him than it would have been against a man who was trying to preserve what he'd built." Ronaldo was very still. "Get in the car," Cassian said. They got in the car. Ronaldo sat in the passenger seat and looked straight through the windshield and said nothing for what was probably 30 seconds, which was a very long time for Ronaldo. Then he said, "You actually meant it." "Yes," Cassian said. "When did you—" Ronaldo started, then stopped. "The recording," he said. "When you listened to the recording." "Before that," Cassian said. He started the car. "I think before that." They drove for a while in silence. The city was quieter at this hour, the streets carrying only the residual traffic of people heading somewhere late or heading home early, and the lights looked different at this time of night, less aggressive, more like the city was just breathing. "The people who work for us," Ronaldo said. "I know," Cassian said. "That's the part that takes 18 months. That's why I said 18 months. Ronaldo was quiet. "I'm not walking away tonight," Cassian said. "I'm telling you what the destination is. The path to it is going to require everything we have for the next year and a half, and it's going to be ugly in ways I can't fully predict yet. But I need you to know where we're going while we're doing it." Ronaldo made a sound in the back of his throat that Cassian had learned over many years, meant he was processing something he would not argue with but needed a moment to absorb. "Naomi," Ronaldo said. "She got the letter." "You know that?" "Kezia texted Marcus," Cassian said. "Marcus told me this afternoon." He paused. "She read it. She didn't respond, but she read it." "What does that mean?" Ronaldo said. "I have no idea," Cassian said honestly. "Nothing probably. Maybe something. I don't know." They stopped at a light. Cassian looked at the red signal for a moment. "She's not going to take me back," he said. "I need you to understand that I know that. This is not a plan to get her back. I don't have the right to have that plan. What I have is a responsibility to make sure my son has a father who isn't the man who handed his mother divorce papers while she was pregnant, and the only way I know how to do that is to stop being that man entirely." He paused. "That's all." Ronaldo looked out the side window. The light changed and Cassian drove. "I've known you 15 years, Ronaldo said. "I know." "You've never said anything like that." "I know," Cassian said. Naomi read the letter twice, standing in the small kitchen of the apartment she was renting now. Her own apartment, her own name on the lease, the first place in 3 years that was entirely hers in every legal and practical sense. She had read it the first time quickly, the way you read something you're not sure you should be reading, and the second time slowly, standing very still with one hand on the counter and the letter in the other, her eyes going over each sentence with the attention she gave to contracts and documents in her work now, the habit of reading for what is actually being said rather than what appears to be said. Elijah was asleep in the next room. She could hear the small sounds of him. He made sounds in his sleep, little sighs and occasional murmurs. And she had learned in 4 months to exist in a constant low register of awareness of those sounds. The way you learn to be always slightly aware of the temperature in a room you're responsible for keeping warm. She set the letter on the counter. She called Kezia. "I got something from him," she said when Kezia picked up. A pause. "What kind of something?" "A letter," Naomi said. "Written by hand. He says the woman, Vivienne, was arrested this morning. He says she set up the whole thing, the night I came home. He says she knew I was coming." Kezia was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do you feel?" "I don't know yet," Naomi said honestly. "I'm trying to figure out if it matters." "Does it?" Naomi looked at the letter on the counter, at his handwriting, which she recognized from the notes he used to leave her in the early mornings when he left before she woke up. Grocery lists, small observations. The occasional sentence that was not useful in any practical sense, but was simply him telling her something he was thinking. She had not known she remembered exactly what his handwriting looked like until she saw it again. "It matters that she's arrested," Naomi said. "It matters that Elijah and I are prepared for whatever is coming publicly. That part is practical, and I'm glad I have it." She paused. "The rest of it—" She stopped. "The rest of it," Kezia said. "He said he was wrong," Naomi said. "He said more than that. But that's the part I keep—" She stopped again. "You already knew he was wrong," Kezia said. "Knowing something and hearing it are different things," Naomi said. "Yeah," Kezia said. "They are." They were quiet for a moment. "He's not asking for anything," Naomi said. "He said that and I think he means it, which is the part I don't know what to do with. Cassian Draven asking for nothing." She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "That's new." "People change," Kezia said carefully. "Sometimes," Naomi said. "Sometimes they just say they do." "True," Kezia said. "I'm not doing anything with this tonight," Naomi said. "I'm going to finish making dinner and feed myself and check on my son and go to sleep. And I'm going to think about this when I'm not standing in my kitchen at 9 o'clock at night having my first reaction to it." "That's wise," Kezia said. "I'm practicing," Naomi said, and this time the almost laugh was clearer. "I'll call you tomorrow." She put her phone down and picked up the letter and read it one more time. Then she folded it and put it in the drawer under the counter where she kept important papers, next to Elijah's birth certificate and her lease and the folder of financial documents from the nonprofit job. And she stood there with her hand on the closed drawer for a moment. Then she went back to making dinner. The next 48 hours moved at the speed of something that had been held back for a long time and was now going everywhere at once. Vivienne Cole's arrest became public by the second morning. Federal cases rarely stayed quiet, and this one had the specific combination of organized crime adjacency, corporate espionage, and financial fraud that made it exactly the kind of story that traveled fast. By noon of the second day, it was in the financial press. By evening, it was in the general news. By the following morning, Draven Holdings was being named in relation to the case in ways that were not accusations but were associations. And associations in this kind of coverage were their own category of damage. Cashin's phone did not stop. He answered the calls he needed to answer, and he did not answer the ones he didn't. And the ones he needed to answer were the ones from the people inside his organization who needed to know what was happening and what the plan was, and whether they needed to begin making their own arrangements. He told each of them the truth, which was that he was going to handle this, that they were not exposed, and that he was going to need their patience for a period that was going to be uncomfortable but was not going to be indefinite. He did not tell any of them about the 18-month plan yet. That conversation was coming. It was not today's conversation. Today's conversation, the one that happened at 11 in the morning in a conference room at the law offices of Whitfield and Associates, was about the federal investigation and what Cassian was going to do about his exposure within it. Whitfield had called it urgent the previous night. Whitfield used the word urgent rarely enough that when he used it, it meant something. Cassian sat across from Whitfield and two of Whitfield's colleagues and listened to them outline the scope of what the federal case could reach following the Vivienne Cole arrest, if investigators decided to look at the organization she had been embedded in rather than exclusively at her activities within it. "What they have," Whitfield said, "is a chain of information transfers that implicates your operational structure as the source of the intelligence Vivienne was moving. They're not currently building a case against you. They don't have evidence of your involvement in the financial crimes or the violence connected to the Castillo operation. But the structure of the investigation creates pathways that, if pursued, could put you in a very uncomfortable position regarding the oversight of the people who were involved. What does cooperation look like? Cassian said. Whitfield looked at him carefully. His two colleagues looked at each other. Define cooperation, Whitfield said. Proactive, Cassian said. Not responsive. I want to come to them before they come to me. I want to give them what I have on the Castillo operations activities. The documentation Ronaldo assembled, the recording, the financial transfers. And I want to do it with the understanding that what I provide is going toward the prosecution of people who actually committed the violence and the fraud, not toward building a case against my organization for having been the victim of a 14-month intelligence breach. Whitfield was quiet for a moment. That is, he said slowly, a significant strategic departure from your normal approach to federal interaction. I know what it is, Cassian said. It also, Whitfield continued carefully, implies a level of voluntary exposure that— Whitfield, Cassian said. Whitfield stopped. I understand what it implies, Cassian said. Set up the meeting. Whitfield looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who has been practicing law for 30 years and has learned to recognize when a client has made a decision that is not going to be argued with, regardless of the legal counsel. All right, Whitfield said. I'll need 48 hours. You have 24, Cassian said. The federal meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon in a government building that was aggressively unimpressive by design, all fluorescent light and industrial carpet, and the particular institutional smell of a place that processes large amounts of paper and human difficulty. Cassian came with Whitfield and no one else, which was itself a statement he had discussed with Whitfield and decided to make deliberately. The lead investigator was a woman named Sadie Torres, who was 51 years old and had the focused, economical manner of someone who had been lied to by better actors than most people would ever meet and had calibrated her credulity accordingly. She shook Cassian's hand without warmth, without hostility, with the professional neutrality of a person who was going to evaluate what he gave her on its merits and had no prior relationship with him to color the evaluation. He found that he respected this. He sat down. He laid out what he had. The full documentation Ronaldo had assembled, organized by date and transaction and communication. The recording from the restaurant. The device analysis from Yusuf. A written account of the 14-month timeline as he understood it, including the information about the Ferrante meeting and 3 other specific operational decisions that he could now identify as having been made from compromised intelligence. Torres and her colleague went through it with the attention of people who knew what they were looking at. At one point, Torres looked up and said, "This is your own organization's operational material in here." "Yes," Cassian said. "You understand that providing this creates a record." "I understand that," Cassian said. She looked at him for a moment. Not long. "Why?" she said. It was a short word. Direct. She was not asking about today's specific decision. She was asking about the thing behind it, and she was asking it plainly because she was someone who preferred to understand the actual motivation of the people she was working with rather than the stated one. Cassian thought about how to answer her. He thought about Naomi reading a letter in a kitchen somewhere on the east side. He thought about a boy 4 months old who didn't know his name yet. He thought about the sentence in the recording, the easiest part, and about what it meant that a woman had spent 14 months building a tool from his worst qualities, and it had worked so completely. "Because I have a son," he said, "and I want him to be able to find out who his father was, and not regret it." Torres held his look for a moment. Then she looked back down at the documents. "We'll review this," she said. "We'll be in touch with your attorney within 48 hours. I was in the parking structure outside the federal building, Whitfield beside him, both of them in the specific silence of men who have just done something that cannot be undone, when his phone buzzed. He looked at it. The number was one he had not seen in months. He knew it immediately, the way you know certain numbers without needing to think about it, the way they live in the muscle memory of your hands from so many times of dialing. Naomi. He stopped walking. Whitfield looked at him and understood without asking and kept walking toward the car and said he'd wait. Cassian stood in the parking structure with the phone in his hand. He picked up. "I got your letter," she said. Her voice was the same. That was the thing that hit him first. Completely irrational. He knew she was the same person. Of course, her voice was the same, but hearing it was still something that moved through him from the outside in. "I know," he said. I'm glad it reached you. A pause. Vivian Cole is on the news, she said. Yes. What's coming? She said. For Elijah and me. Is it direct? Do I need to? No, he said. You're not exposed. Your name is not in any of it. I made sure of that. He paused. I will continue to make sure of that. Silence on the line for a moment. Why did you really write that letter? She said. Not a challenge, an actual question. The way Naomi asked questions, which was directly and with the expectation of a direct answer, and which he had not fully appreciated until he was standing in a parking structure, having been without her voice for months, and hearing it ask him something directly. Because you deserve to know what happened, he said, and because… He stopped. Say it, she said. He breathed. Because I'm trying to be someone my son won't be ashamed of, he said, and I don't know how to do that while also keeping information from you that belongs to you. A long silence. He could hear her breathing, faintly, the ambient sound of wherever she was. Indoors, he thought, something quiet in the background. I'm not ready to talk to you, she said, about any of it. I'm not ready. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to be. But I need to know one thing, she said. Okay. The night I came home, she said, was any of it your choice? Or was all of it her? He stood in the parking structure. He thought about a man who was already restless. He thought about a folder he had asked his attorney to prepare on a Monday before Vivian ever said a word to him about Naomi's schedule, before she ever positioned anything, before the night that Naomi came home. The honest answer was complicated. The honest answer had two parts that both had to be said, and neither one was the whole truth by itself. She manipulated the timing, he said. She arranged the evening. She made sure you came home when you did, and she made sure everything was in place for you to find it the way you found it. He paused. But I had already decided, before she arranged anything. The decision was mine. She just made it into a weapon and aimed it. Silence. Okay, Naomi said, and then, She stopped. He could hear something moving in the background, a small sound. Elijah, he thought, a 4-month-old boy making a sound in whatever room he was in, and Naomi adjusting her attention toward it with the automatic precision of a mother. I have to go, she said. Okay, he said. Don't call me, she said. A pause. I'll call you if I'm ready. Okay, he said. She hung up. He stood in the parking structure for a moment with the phone at his side and the fluorescent light overhead and the ambient smell of concrete and motor oil and the specific silence of a place that is functional rather than anything else. He walked to the car. Whitfield looked at him as he got in but did not ask anything. They drove for about 4 blocks before Whitfield said quietly, Are you all right? No, Cassian said, but I'm moving in the right direction. Whitfield made a sound of acknowledgement and looked back at the road. The gala was Ronaldo's idea, which surprised Cassian when he first heard it and stopped surprising him when Ronaldo explained it. You need to be public, Ronaldo said. Not defensive, public. Proactive. You have given the federal case everything they need to prosecute the Castillo operation's involvement. You have begun the process of restructuring the organization. You have done things that, if they happen quietly, look like a man trying to minimize his exposure and disappear. If they happen in a context where people see you, the right people, press and legitimate business and public figures, they look like something else. What do they look like? Cassian said. Like a man who is choosing to be accountable, Ronaldo said, which is what you are, and which is a story that is better told in public than in private, because in private it's a legal strategy and in public it's a human decision. Cassian looked at him. I've been doing this a long time, Ronaldo said. Let me do this part. The gala was a charity event, a genuine one, not a constructed vehicle, an organization that had existed for 12 years and supported youth development programs in underserved communities throughout the city. Ronaldo had been a quiet donor for several years and had a relationship with the board, and when he explained what the event might involve, the board had discussed it and decided that the kind of statement being proposed was consistent with what the organization stood for. It was in 3 days. Cassian spent those 3 days doing what he had told Victor Castillo he was going to do, and what he had told Whitfield he was going to do, and what he had told Ronaldo he was going to do, And the doing of it was not clean or smooth or anything close to the way things felt when you were executing a plan from a position of control. It felt like dismantling something with your hands, piece by piece, in a way that made your hands bleed, and doing it anyway. He called each of the 7 peripheral associates that Ronaldo had identified as potential vulnerabilities before Victor Castillo could reach them. He spoke to each of them directly, which was not how he normally communicated with people at that level of the organization. That was usually Ronaldo's domain, or handled through intermediaries. He did it personally because personal was the only register that mattered right now. He told each of them the truth about what was coming, what they were exposed to, and what he was doing to minimize that exposure. He did not ask them for anything. He gave each of them a number to call if federal investigators approached them, and he told each of them that cooperation with the investigation was not going to be penalized by him, that they were free to make the best decisions for themselves and their families. 3 of them wept. That surprised him. He had not expected that. He sat with it. He set up a meeting with the Ferrante family's representative, not Lorenzo himself, who was too proud for a first meeting of this kind, but a trusted lieutenant, and he delivered a direct acknowledgement of how the Ferrante negotiation had gone and why, and what had been taken from the Ferrante family by the intelligence breach, and what he was prepared to do to make it right. The meeting took 2 hours. The Ferrante representative left without committing to anything, but shook his hand at the door, which was more than Cassian had expected. On the night of the gala, he stood in front of his bathroom mirror and looked at himself for a long time. He looked at the suit. He looked at his hands, which had done things he was not going to list here because listing them would not serve any purpose, and he was not interested in performing his own self-recrimination. He looked at his face, which was the face of a man who had not slept more than 5 hours in any single night in 2 weeks, and who had, during those 2 weeks, made more decisions based on something other than self-interest than he had made in the entire preceding 15 years combined. He did not know if that was enough. He suspected it was not enough, and he was going to do it anyway. The ballroom held 400 people. Politicians, he registered as he moved through the room. Business leaders. Several faces he recognized from the Draven Holdings board and the associated network of legitimate enterprises. Media people. He saw a reporter from the financial press, 2 from General News. Representatives of 3 other organized crime families who were here because this was the kind of event families like his attended to demonstrate legitimacy, and who watched him move through the room with the particular attention of people calculating what his presence meant for the current arrangement of things. Ronaldo was at the perimeter, always at the perimeter. Cassian moved through the room and shook hands and said the required things, and did not drink from the glass a waiter offered him, because he needed to be exactly as clear as he currently was when he got to the moment Ronaldo had built this evening around. That moment came at 9:15, when the organization's executive director stepped to the podium and went through the evening's program, and then said that they were honored to have a guest speaker who had requested the opportunity to address the room, and introduced Cassian Draven. The room went quiet in a specific way when he stepped to the podium. Not the polite quiet of an audience settling for a planned speaker. The alert, watchful quiet of 400 people who are trying to figure out what they are about to witness. He looked out at them. He thought about Naomi, who was not here, who would not have come even if he had asked her to, which he had not, who was somewhere on the east side of this city, living the life she had built from the ground up after he handed her a folder in a doorway, and doing it well, and not needing this room or anything in it. He thought about Elijah, who was 4 months old and asleep. He put his hands on the podium. He said, "I'm not going to give you the speech I was going to give you." The quiet in the room became something different, more acute. "I was going to say something about community investment," he said, "and about the importance of supporting organizations that do the kind of work this foundation does. All of that is true and I believe it, but there are things that are also true that I have not said in a room like this, and I have been in rooms like this for 15 years. And I think the reason I never said them is that I was afraid of what it would cost me. And I have recently come to understand that what the silence has already cost is considerably worse than what the truth would." He looked at them. He said, "I ran a criminal organization. I used language like operations and associates and logistics because it was cleaner than the words that accurately described what those things were. I told myself that the people I dealt with had all made choices, and that choices have consequences, and that I was simply one of the consequences that operating in certain spaces came with. I told myself that was different from being the cause of something. He paused. It isn't different. I know that now. The room was absolutely still. A woman named Vivian Cole spent 14 months embedded in my organization, feeding intelligence to a competing family and facilitating events that caused real harm to real people. She has been arrested and is being prosecuted, and the evidence she used to operate has been turned over to federal investigators. I provided that evidence willingly, and I am cooperating with that investigation. He paused. She used my operation to do harm. She also used me personally to do harm to someone who deserved none of it, my wife, who I divorced while she was 7 months pregnant, because a woman I trusted had arranged the circumstances to make that happen at the worst possible moment for a woman she saw as an obstacle. He felt his jaw tighten and held it. I'm not telling you this to get sympathy. I'm not telling you this because I want to be absolved. I'm telling you this because there are people in this room who have known me for years and who are going to find out pieces of it anyway, and I would rather say it in my own words in a room I chose than have it come out in pieces that someone else shapes. His hands tightened on the podium. I am in the process of dismantling my operation, he said, responsibly, without leaving the people who worked for me exposed to consequences they don't deserve. It will take time and it will not be. He finished the sentence. It will take time and it will not be clean, and I am not asking anyone in this room to applaud it or to forgive it. I am simply telling you what is true, because I have spent 15 years in rooms like this one, saying things that sounded like the truth and were not, and I find that I no longer have the appetite for it. He stepped back from the podium. The room did not applaud immediately. There was a moment, 3-4 seconds, of the particular silence that follows something that a room full of people does not quite know how to categorize, because it does not fit any of the existing categories they brought with them. And then, from somewhere near the back, a single person began to clap. Slow and deliberate, not enthusiastic, more like acknowledgement than approval. And then a few others joined, and then more, and it was never the sound of a room that had been moved to celebration. It was the sound of a room that had witnessed something and was confirming that they had witnessed it. Cassian walked off the platform. Ronaldo was at his elbow within seconds, not saying anything, just there, which was what Ronaldo had always been best at, being present without requiring anything from the moment. They moved toward the side exit, and as they did, a man stepped into their path. Not aggressively, just decisively, placing himself in a spot that made stopping unavoidable without being a scene. He was in his 60s, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades being listened to, and Cassian recognized him as a city councilman whose name appeared regularly in connection with municipal development. The councilman looked at Cassian for a moment. Then he said, "That took something." "It took a long time," Cassian said, "which is different." The councilman considered that. Then he stepped aside and let them pass. Outside, the night air was cold and direct, and Cassian stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in. His breath came out in a small cloud and disappeared. He stood there for a moment with his eyes closed, which was something he almost never did in public spaces, and felt the weight of the last 2 hours settling into his body the way heavy things settle. Not cleanly, not all at once, but finding their level. The Ferrante representative was there, Ronaldo said quietly behind him. He stayed for the speech. He left without saying anything to anyone. "Good or bad?" Cassian said without opening his eyes. "I don't know yet," Ronaldo said. "Probably both." Cassian opened his eyes. The street in front of him, the city doing what it always did, indifferent to any individual's particular reckoning. A cab went past. Someone down the block was laughing at something. "Victor Castillo's people were also in the room," Ronaldo said. "I know," Cassian said. "I saw them when I walked in." "And you went ahead?" "Yes." Ronaldo was quiet for a moment. Then, "You understand what you've done to your position, publicly?" "Yes." "The leverage you had, the silence, the—" "Ronaldo," Cassian said. Ronaldo stopped. "I know what I gave up tonight," Cassian said. "I know exactly what I gave up. I thought about it for 3 days before I agreed to stand at that podium." He turned and looked at Ronaldo directly. "I gave up the version of safety that comes from nobody knowing where you really stand. I know that. What I got in exchange is, I don't know yet what I got in exchange. I won't know for a while." He paused. "But I know what the other version cost. I was paying it without even knowing I was paying it, and then one day I came home and found out the bill." Ronaldo looked at him. "Get some sleep," Cassian said. "We'll deal with tomorrow. He got into the car alone. The federal case moved faster than Whitfield had predicted. In the weeks that followed the gala, as the cooperative agreement between Cassian and the investigation solidified into something formal and documented, the chain of prosecutable offenses that Vivian Cole's activities had generated began to unspool with the momentum of a thing that had been accumulating pressure for a long time. The Castillo operation's financial fraud was extensive and well documented in the materials Cassian provided. The murders, there were ultimately 5 that federal investigators connected to the intelligence Vivian had trafficked, carried the weight that murder charges always carry, which is that they changed the register of everything around them. Dario Castellano, faced with the specificity of what the investigation had, made a calculation that men in his position often make and began to talk. What he gave investigators was not Petra Castillo, who was careful and had lawyers the way some people have furniture, everywhere and expensive, but it was enough to make Petra's position untenable in ways that accumulated quietly, and then, one morning, all at once. Petra was arrested on a Wednesday. Victor Castillo issued no public statement. He did not contact Cassian. He did not contact Ronaldo. He simply went quiet, the way very old and very careful men go quiet when the board has rearranged itself in ways they did not arrange. And Cassian understood this to mean that whatever had existed between them was now a closed matter, which was the best available outcome and not one he had been certain of. Vivian's trial date was set for spring. Her attorney entered a not guilty plea, which everyone involved understood to be procedural. The recording from the restaurant, the device analysis, the financial transfer documentation, and the testimony of 2 witnesses who had worked within the Castillo operations logistics structure and had agreed to cooperate. It was the kind of case that didn't leave much room for a different conclusion, and everyone in the courtroom, including Vivian's own attorneys, understood this. Cassian was not called to testify at the preliminary hearings. Whitfield managed his role in the proceedings with the care of someone who understood that Cassian's cooperative relationship with the investigation was a structural asset that needed to be protected from the kind of exposure that could compromise it. He sat in his apartment. He had moved out of the house by then, the enormous 22-room house that had always swallowed sound, and he followed the case through Whitfield's briefings and the occasional news report, and he felt each time he read a new development, something that was not satisfaction exactly, something more like the recognition of a thing being completed. The house sold in March. He had priced it below market, which Whitfield thought was unnecessary and which Cassian thought was right, and it sold in 11 days to a family with 3 children who had outgrown their apartment. He signed the papers in Whitfield's office and walked out into a March afternoon that was still cold, but had the particular quality of cold that has a warmth underneath it, the cold of a season that is almost finished being what it was. He had given a substantial portion of the proceeds, combined with several other asset liquidations from the dismantling process, to a legal trust established for Elijah's benefit, not through Whitfield's office, through a separate attorney, an independent one, to ensure there was no ambiguity about the money's provenance or its purpose. The trust was structured to be accessible to Elijah at 18 for education or whatever he chose to do with it, and managed by a board of 3 people. Naomi, her mother, and a financial professional Naomi had chosen independently. Naomi had agreed to the trust arrangement through her own attorney after 2 weeks of consideration, with specific conditions about its structure that her attorney communicated to his attorney, and at no point during this process did she and Cassian speak directly. It was transactional and careful and appropriate, and it was what she had decided, and he respected it with the completeness of a man who understood he did not have standing to want it to be different. He moved into an apartment in a building that was ordinary by any standard he had previously applied to where he lived. 2 bedrooms, the second one empty, on the 14th floor of a building that housed teachers and young families, and a retired postal worker named Mr. Okafor, who held the elevator door when he saw you coming and always said good evening with the genuine warmth of a man who found the small courtesies of shared building life satisfying. Cassian found, over the weeks of living in the apartment, that he looked forward to the evenings he ran into Mr. Okafor in the elevator. He did not examine this too closely. He found a job. This was, objectively, the most complicated part of the transition, because a man with his background and the public nature of his recent circumstances was not a straightforward hire, and he was not interested in the version of employment that amounted to sitting on the board of something and providing the appearance of legitimate involvement without actual work. He was interested in actual work. He had always been good at operations, at seeing the structural logic of how things moved and where they broke down and what needed to be different. He talked to a logistics consulting firm that specialized in nonprofit supply chain efficiency, a company staffed largely by former military and corporate operations people, and he was honest with them about his background in a conversation that lasted 2 hours and covered ground that was uncomfortable for everyone in the room. They hired him on a 3-month probationary basis. He was on time every morning. He was not the best person in the room at the specific technical skills the work required, and he knew it, and he did the work of getting better at them with the same focused attention he had once applied to operations that he would not describe here. His colleagues were wary of him at first and gradually became something other than wary, not friendly exactly, more like accustomed, which felt like an appropriate pace. He ate lunch alone for the first month, and with a colleague named Philip for the second and third months. And Philip turned out to be a genuinely interesting person who had spent 12 years in military logistics in places that had rearranged his understanding of what mattered, and their lunch conversations were the kind that surprised you by going somewhere unexpected. Ronaldo came by the apartment once a month. They had dinner at the kitchen table, which was a modest kitchen table from a furniture store that was not the kind of furniture store Cassian had ever shopped in before, and they talked about the things that needed to be talked about. The dismantling was ongoing and would be for another year. There were complications Ronaldo was managing that Cassian needed to know about, and several he didn't. They talked about those things, and then sometimes they talked about other things. Mr. Okafor, whom Ronaldo met on a Tuesday and declared in his characteristic way to be a good man, which from Ronaldo was a complete assessment. Philip and the lunch conversations. A book Cassian had read, which Ronaldo declined to read but was willing to hear summarized. Ronaldo was building something of his own, quietly, in the space created by the dismantling. Cassian knew this without being told the specifics, because he knew Ronaldo, and he trusted the direction of it the way you trust the character of someone you have known through the worst conditions you've shared with another person. When you've seen what they do when there's no one watching and nothing to gain. The first time Cassian saw Elijah, the boy was 7 months old. It happened not because Cassian asked. He had told Naomi he would not contact her, that the next move was hers, and he had maintained that with a discipline that cost him something real every single day, and he maintained it anyway because that was what he had said, and his words had not historically meant enough, and he needed them to mean something now, even when no one was monitoring whether they did. Naomi called on a Sunday morning in April. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm at the Eastside Farmers Market," she said, "the one on Caldwell Street. Elijah is here." He was quiet for a moment. "If you want to come," she said, "I'll be here until noon." "Okay," he said. "This is not—" She paused. "I'm not telling you what this is. I'm telling you where I am." "I understand," he said. He took the subway, which was a decision he made standing in his apartment with his keys in his hand, choosing the subway over the car, because the subway took 17 minutes and the drive would take 9, and he needed the extra 8 minutes to sit with what he was about to do without moving too fast toward it. He sat on the train and watched the stations go past and breathed. The market was crowded in the specific pleasant way of a Sunday morning in April, when the winter has finally conceded and people come outside with the slightly dazed relief of the recently freed. There were stalls selling vegetables and bread and cut flowers and honey, and there were children everywhere, and dogs, and the sound of a musician playing something on a guitar at the far end. And Cassian moved through all of it and found her by the flower stalls. She was looking at tulips. She had Elijah strapped to her front in a carrier, facing outward, the way babies who have reached the age of wanting to see the world are carried. He was wearing a blue knit hat with an animal face on the front of it. A bear, Cassian thought, or possibly a cat. And he was examining the tulips with the focused intensity that very young children bring to examining everything, as if the redness of a red tulip were a problem he was determined to solve. Cassian stopped about 10 feet away. Naomi had not seen him yet. He stood there and looked at his son's face for the first time. He had expected this moment to be overwhelming. He had been braced for something large and interior and difficult to manage. What he felt instead was simpler and quieter than that. A recognition, like seeing something you had always known was true finally made visible. The small nose. The particular shape of the eyes, which were Naomi's. The mouth, which was not hers, was his, or his mother's, or something older that moved through families without asking. He was a person. A whole small person who existed independently of everything Cassian had done and failed to do, who had been growing and learning and sleeping and waking up in a world that did not yet include his father, and who turned his head now with the sudden decisive movement of a baby who has located a new point of interest, and looked directly at Cassian. They looked at each other. Elijah considered him with the complete seriousness of a 7-month-old making an assessment. His expression went through several phases rapidly: attention, scrutiny, something that looked almost like a question, and then, with the equally sudden decisiveness of a baby who has made up his mind, he put his fist in his mouth. Naomi turned. She looked at Cassian across the 10 feet between them, and for a moment neither of them moved or spoke, and the market went on around them, and the musician at the far end continued to play, and the world continued its Sunday morning in April without caring particularly what was happening in this corner of the flower stalls. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She looked older, which was not the right word. Not older the way the word usually meant. More settled. Like something in her had found its level and stayed there. And the staying had given her face a quality it hadn't had before. A quality he didn't have a clean word for. Decided, maybe. Like a person who had made certain determinations about themselves and was no longer spending energy on the having not made them. She looked better than she had ever looked. He was aware that this was not an observation he had the right to make or to say, and he made it privately and said nothing. "He's been staring at strangers all morning," she said. "He's very social. He looks—" Cassian stopped, started over. "He looks like you." "His mouth is yours," she said. A small silence. Not a bad one. "Can I—" he began. "Yes," she said, before he finished. He crossed the 10 feet and stood in front of her and looked at his son up close for the first time. Elijah examined him with the fist still in his mouth, and then removed the fist and reached out one small hand and grabbed the front of Cassian's coat and held on with the grip that babies have that is always more powerful than seems possible for the size of the hand. Cassian looked down at that hand on his coat. He breathed. "He does that to everything," Naomi said. "He's in a grabbing phase." "Okay," Cassian said. "I was not going to fall apart at a flower stall at the East Side Farmers Market on a Sunday in April." He was going to stand here with his son's fist in his coat and be exactly where he was and not make it into anything larger than what it was, which was already larger than anything he had words for. "How are you?" he said to Naomi. "Good," she said. And then, because she was Naomi and had never been interested in the decorative version of anything, actually good, not performing good, genuinely. "I can see that," he said. She looked at him for a moment, assessing the way she had always assessed things, directly, without softening the look into something more comfortable. "How are you?" she said. He thought about it honestly. "Figuring it out," he said. "Working. Living in an apartment that is significantly smaller than anything I've lived in since I was 22. He paused. "It's fine. It's actually fine." "Good," she said. And the way she said it was neutral and genuine, without warmth and without coldness. The way you wish someone well when you have loved them and moved through the loving and arrived somewhere on the other side of it that doesn't have a name but is real. Elijah made a sound, not a word, too young for words, but a sound with clear communicative intent, directed at Cassian with the focus of a small person who has decided you are worth addressing. Cassian looked at him. "He wants you to look at him," Naomi said. "I am looking at him," Cassian said. "More," she said. "He wants more looking." Cassian looked at his son fully, squarely, with nothing else in his field of attention, and Elijah accepted this as satisfactory and made another sound and then looked at the tulips. They walked through the market for 40 minutes. Not together, exactly. There was no holding hands, no easy closeness. But in proximity, moving in the same direction, stopping at the same stalls sometimes and sometimes different ones. Naomi bought bread and a small jar of honey and a bunch of yellow tulips. Cassian bought a bag of apples that he did not particularly want, but it gave his hands something to do. They talked the way two people talk when there is an enormous amount between them and they are both choosing, with the active deliberateness of people who know what they are choosing, to stay on the surface of things. They talked about Elijah's sleeping patterns, which had recently become less chaotic. They talked about the nonprofit where Naomi worked, which had grown in the months she'd been there in ways that surprised even its director. They talked about the case briefly. She had been following it, she said, because she needed to know what was happening, and he understood that and had no issue with it. At one point she said, "I testified." He looked at her. "To the federal investigators," she said, "about the night I came home, about what I saw, what was said, the timeline of it." She held his look steadily. "I thought you should know." "Thank you for telling me," he said. I didn't do it against you," she said. "I did it because they asked, and because it was true, and because the truth of it belongs to the record." "I know," he said. "I know that." She nodded once, and they kept walking. At the edge of the market, where it opened out onto the street, they stopped. The natural stopping point. Elijah had fallen asleep in the carrier with the speed and totality that babies fall asleep. One moment fully present and engaged, the next simply gone. His head tipped to the side and his mouth slightly open and one small hand still loosely closed around air where he had been holding something a few minutes ago. Naomi looked at Cassian. He looked at her. There was something he wanted to say. He had been carrying it through the 40 minutes and through everything before the 40 minutes. A weight that had a specific shape that he had never gotten quite close enough to the right words for. He stood on the edge of the farmer's market in April with apples in one hand and his sleeping son 3 feet away, and he tried to find it. "I know there's nothing," he started. Stopped. Tried again. "I know that what I did isn't something you ask forgiveness for and expect to receive it. I know that's not how it works. I know that you didn't do anything wrong, and that everything that happened to you was something I did or something I failed to prevent because I wasn't paying the right kind of attention." He paused. "I know all of that. I'm not saying it to get something. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I know it, because I spent a long time not knowing it the way I know it now, and the difference matters to me." Naomi listened to this without expression. Not cold. She was not a cold person and had never been one. Just listening, the way she listened, with the full weight of her attention. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know you know it." He waited. "That's actually the hardest part," she said. "It would be easier if you didn't." She looked at the sleeping boy between them. "It would be easier if you were still the person who handed me that folder and felt nothing, because then I would know exactly what to do with you for the rest of my life." She paused. "You being this, whatever this is, that's more complicated." "I know," he said. "I'm not ready," she said. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready. I need you to understand that is genuinely true, not something I'm saying to punish you. I don't have any interest in punishing you. The woman I was when I walked out of that house is not the woman standing here. And the woman standing here has worked very hard to be who she is, and I am not willing to risk her for—" She stopped. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to." "I know you're not," she said. "That's also complicated." He almost smiled. It was not a happy thing, the almost smile. It was the expression of a man who has learned to find the honesty of a hard moment to be, in its own way, something close to what good feels like. "Can I see him again?" he said. "Yes," she said. "We'll work something out. Through our attorneys first, and then, maybe eventually more directly. We'll see how it goes." "Okay," he said. "Don't make promises about being consistent and then not be consistent," she said. "That's the one thing I'll tell you. He won't understand it yet for a while, but he'll understand it eventually, and kids remember the shape of things even when they can't name them. Don't be someone he reaches for and finds isn't there." "I won't," Cassian said. She looked at him for a moment, measuring the way she measured things. "Okay," she said. Elijah made a sound in his sleep. A small, complete sound, announcing nothing to no one, just existing. They both looked at him. "I'm going to go," Naomi said. "I know," he said. She shifted the carrier slightly, settling the boy's weight, and she turned and walked out onto the street, and the Sunday morning received her without ceremony, without any particular acknowledgement that something significant had just taken place in the space of a market stall, and a 40-minute walk, and a conversation at the edge of the sidewalk. She walked, and Elijah slept against her chest, and the yellow tulips were in the crook of her arm, and she did not look back. Cassian stood there for a moment. Then he walked the other direction. The months that followed had the texture of actual life, which is to say they were ordinary in the way that things are ordinary when you are no longer building a wall between yourself and the ordinary, and occasionally something in the ordinary surprised him with how much it could hold. He was consistent. He saw Elijah on a schedule that Naomi's attorney and Whitfield worked out over 3 weeks of careful communication, and then, as the months passed and the schedule held, on arrangements that began to involve less attorney communication and more direct coordination. Short visits first, an afternoon at a park, a Sunday morning that expanded from 2 hours to 4 without being planned that way. Elijah at 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, each month bringing new things he could do that he couldn't do the month before. New ways of being a person that arrived without announcement and required everyone around him to recalibrate. Cassian learned to recalibrate. I was not a natural at it. He was a man who had spent 15 years building systems designed to resist recalibration, to hold their shape under pressure, to treat the unexpected as something to be managed rather than something to be moved by. He was learning a different way of being in the world, and he was doing it incompetently sometimes, and with more grace than he expected other times, and this was what it looked like. At 10 months, Elijah pulled himself upright for the first time, using the edge of a low coffee table in Naomi's apartment, which Cassian had been invited into for the first time that afternoon under circumstances that were still careful but were less mediated than they had been. He grabbed the table edge and pulled, and his legs straightened under him, and he stood there for approximately 4 seconds with the expression of someone who has just discovered something that will change everything and hasn't decided yet whether that's good. And then he sat back down hard on the floor. He looked at Naomi. Then he looked at Cassian. Then he looked at the floor with an expression of focused consideration. Then he grabbed the table edge again. Cassian and Naomi were both watching from across the room, both leaning slightly forward in the way of adults who are trying not to breathe too loud during something that matters. And when Elijah stood up the second time and held it for 7 seconds before sitting back down, Naomi made a sound that was not quite a word and put her hand over her mouth, and Cassian sat very still. Elijah looked at them both with the satisfaction of someone who knows he has done something right. "Hey," Cassian said quietly. Elijah looked at him directly. "Good job," Cassian said. Elijah grabbed the table and did it again. Vivian Cole was convicted on 11 counts in May of the following year. The sentencing was covered by the press with the thoroughness reserved for a case that had, over the course of the investigation and trial, accumulated the particular cultural weight of a story that people felt told them something true about power and proximity and the specific forms that ambition takes when it is not checked by anything. The coverage mostly focused on the financial crimes and the organized crime connections and the operational intelligence angle. Some of it mentioned Cassian. Some of it mentioned Naomi in the peripheral way that women who have been harmed by the primary narrative tend to be mentioned, as context, as background, as the human cost that makes the story meaningful without being given the space to be a full story herself. Naomi read the coverage on her phone at her kitchen table while Elijah ate cereal and dropped approximately 40% of it on the floor, which he found more interesting than the cereal remaining in the bowl. She felt reading it less than she had expected to feel. She set the phone down and looked at her son distributing cereal across the kitchen floor and felt something that was not happiness exactly, because happiness felt too light for what had happened, too unmarked. It was something heavier and more durable than happiness, something that had been built piece by piece from the ground up by a woman who had walked out of a house in the November dark with an ultrasound photo in her pocket and made a promise to herself in a car on an empty street. She had kept the promise. She picked up her son and cleaned his face with the easy efficiency of a mother who has done this 10,000 times. And he tolerated it with the resigned expression of a small person who understands that certain indignities are part of the arrangement, and she kissed his forehead and put him down, and he immediately went back to the cereal situation. She called Kezia. "It's done," she said when Kezia picked up. "I saw," Kezia said. "How do you feel?" Naomi said. A pause. Kezia understood that this question was not about Kezia. "How do you feel?" "Like it's over," Naomi said. "Like it's actually over and I can stop waiting for the next thing." "Good," Kezia said. "That's good." "Yeah," Naomi said. "It is." Cassian heard about the verdict from Whitfield, who called with the specific tone of a man delivering information rather than news. Because for Whitfield, this had always been a legal matter, and legal matters concluded in specific ways that were either favorable or unfavorable, and this one was favorable, and that was the extent of his emotional investment in it. Cassian thanked him and hung up and sat in his apartment. He had taken the day off work, not knowing why when he requested it and knowing exactly why now. He sat at his kitchen table, which was still the modest one from the furniture store, with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and he sat there for a while with the verdict and what it meant and what it didn't mean. It didn't mean he was clean. He had never been a clean person in the way the word usually implied, and the verdict in Vivian Cole's case didn't retroactively change the nature of what his organization had been or what he had been willing to do within it. The federal cooperation had provided a measure of legal insulation for his direct liability, but insulation was not innocence, and he knew the difference, and he did not comfort himself with the confusion of the two. What it meant was that a specific chapter was closed, that the woman who had walked through his life with the patience of a long game and played him completely had been held accountable by a mechanism that was at least partially the result of his own willingness to provide what was needed to hold her accountable. That something he had done had led to a consequence that was more just than unjust. That was not nothing. It was not everything either. It was one thing, and he put it in the place in his accounting where it belonged. Not too large, not dismissed. And he drank the cold coffee and looked out the window. He called Naomi that evening. She picked up on the third ring. He could hear Elijah in the background, the specific evening sounds of a baby who has been bathed and fed and is now in that liminal state between awake and asleep, making noises that are half protest and half surrender. "I know you saw," he said. "Yes," she said. "I wanted to say—" "I don't know what I wanted to say exactly," he said. "I wanted to say something." She was quiet for a moment. In the background, Elijah made a sound. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "Not tonight." "Okay," he said. A silence that was not uncomfortable. The sounds of an evening, a baby's voice navigating the distance between awake and sleep. "He's been trying to say da today," Naomi said. "He's very still." "He's not there yet," she said. "It's more like duh, but he's working on it." "Okay," he said. His voice came out slightly different than he intended. "I just thought you'd want to know," she said. "I do," he said. "I want to know." "Okay," she said. "Good night, Cassian." "Good night," he said. He sat at the table for a long time after the call ended. The apartment was quiet in the way that apartments are quiet when you have come to peace with them. Not the kind of quiet that feels like absence, but the kind that feels like room. He had learned the difference. He was not who he had been. He was not done becoming who he was going to be. I was somewhere in between those two things, which was where all real change lived. Not in the dramatic moment of decision, but in the long, unspectacular middle of actually doing it, day after day, imperfectly, and sometimes badly, and with the specific doggedness of a person who has decided that this direction is the one that matters, even when the progress is slow. Outside, the city did what it always did. Someone in the building above him walked from one room to another. Mr. Okafor probably, doing the last things of his evening before bed. Down the hall, a door closed. The city beyond the window was lit the way it was always lit at this hour. The accumulated light of 10 million people going about their lives in proximity to each other, none of them intersecting in the way that Cassian had once believed power meant. Not by controlling the space between them, but just by living alongside them in the ordinary and complicated way of people who share a city and a time and not much more. He got up and rinsed his cup. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. The last scene of this story is not dramatic. It is a Saturday morning in June, 11 months after a woman walked out of a house in the November dark with an ultrasound photo in her pocket. The farmer's market on Caldwell Street is open, and the June version of it is fuller than the April version. The stalls weighted with the surplus of an actual growing season, strawberries and zucchini blossoms, and fresh herbs in rubber-banded bunches. Naomi is here with Elijah, who is no longer in the carrier. He is walking now, not steadily, not confidently, but with the specific joy of a person who has recently discovered a capacity they intend to use absolutely everywhere, toddling between stalls on legs that still sometimes decide to disagree with each other, grabbing at anything within reach, which is everything at knee height and below. Cassian arrives at 10:15. He finds them by the strawberry stall because Elijah has located the strawberry samples and is conducting his own assessment of them with complete scientific dedication. Naomi sees Cassian coming and tips her head slightly in acknowledgement, the small greeting of two people who have established a language between them that doesn't require full sentences for the ordinary moments. He crouches down to Elijah's level. Elijah looks at him. His face goes through the rapid assessment process, the inherited seriousness that Naomi recognizes as coming from somewhere in both of their families simultaneously, and then something opens in it the way things open in the faces of children who have decided on the fundamental trustworthiness of a person. He says, with great effort and tremendous satisfaction, and the specific pride of someone who has been working on a thing and is now delivering it. Duh! It is not the word. It is the shape of the word, the intention of it, aimed with complete deliberateness at the man crouching in front of him. Cassian looks at his son. He stays crouched there for a moment with his hands on his knees, and this small person in front of him who has his mouth and Naomi's eyes and is wearing a shirt with a strawberry on it. Because of course he is, because the world has a sense of humor and sometimes it is gentle, and Cassian looks at him and feels the weight of everything. The folder on the nightstand, the November dark, the 47 minutes at his desk, the recording, the parking structure, the podium, the apples he didn't need at a flower stall in April, all of it, the full accumulated cost and consequence of who he had been and what it had taken to start becoming something else, pressing down through him like something finding its level. He puts out his hand. Elijah grabs it with both of his. He says, duh, again, more certain of it this time. Yeah, Cassian says very quietly. I'm here. And Naomi is watching from 2 feet away with the strawberries and the yellow June morning, and she is not forgiving him, and she is not forgiving him. She is simply here too, and she has built something from nothing with her own hands, and she is keeping it. And some mornings that is the whole story, and it is enough. The market goes on around them. The city breathes. Elijah lets go of his father's hand and turns back to the strawberries because he is 11 months old, and the strawberries have been extremely promising, and there is only so long a person can be expected to hold still. Cassian stands up. The morning continues.